Good evening, everybody. Gunta Yuatusa Ishkatane Achat, Shara Hani Naflahash Yudusach. My name is Blair Hogan, and I'm honored to serve as president of the Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of our members, our board of directors, and our partners across the territory, I'd like to welcome you to our debate, being held here in the traditional territories of the Kwalindun First Nation and the Tahan Council. Tonight's discussion takes place in the spirit of respect, collaboration, and accountability. Values deeply rooted in the agreements that define the modern Yukon. Yukon First Nation commerce exists because of the values set out in the Chapter 22 of the Umbrella Final Agreement. That chapter commits governments to ensure that Yukon First Nations have equitable opportunities to participate in and benefit from the Yukon economy, and work in partnership toward self-sufficiency, entrepreneurship, and employment for our people. It recognizes that economic development is not only about contracts or capital. It's about partnership, it's about respect, and shared prosperity. YFNCC was created to make those commitments real, to turn words of Chapter 22 into action. And I encourage you to reference this document during your responses tonight. Today, our members include First Nation development corporations, wealth entities, entrepreneurs, and joint ventures from across the sectors: mining, energy, construction, tourism, technology, and so much more. The questions you'll hear tonight reflect that foundation. They're drawn directly from the priorities of our members. I want to thank our candidates for being here. I want to thank all of you in the audience and those online for joining this important conversation. To begin in a good way, I'm honored to introduce Rose Krishnuk, who will open tonight's debate with a prayer and serve as our moderator. Rose, the floor is yours. Gunachish.
Thank you, Blair, for that. So we will start with a prayer. Konishchish datayata nje. Aganzanu sothan dakanata je. Sothan datsanata. Dadu dakunata je. Klahu. Konishchish. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's territorial election debate hosted by the Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce. Nanathatsa Uye, Gudana Uye, Rose Kushnerk. I am from the Champagne-Najak First Nations and a member of the Crow Clan. And I'll be your moderator this evening. And I thank you all for joining us in the room and Zoom tonight. So tonight's debate is an opportunity for us to hear directly from the territorial candidates on key issues that matter to Yukon First Nations businesses. To get things started, I'd like to acknowledge once again, that we were on the traditional territory of the Tahan Council and Kwalindun First Nations. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Gunta Business Consulting Ltd for providing the broadcast and technical support for tonight's debate. So before we begin, I'll be going over the rules of the format for the debate. Tonight is a little bit different than last night. We'll start with the opening statements by each of the candidates, followed by responses to core questions and rebuttals. Later this evening, we'll take a short break where the audience is asked to write questions for the candidates on slips of paper and submit them to the table back there. For those online, please write your questions in the chat box. All questions will be collected, but not every question will be answered tonight. We will ensure the parties receive the questions and will give them a chance to respond to us, and we'll post their questions on our website. Some questions, too, may also be amalgamated if there are many similar in nature. So I'll now read the format overview. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond to questions. There will be 6 main questions tonight that we're hoping to get done. If not, we don't. But we're hoping the core questions, we have 6 of them. After all candidates have spoken, there will be a 1-minute rebuttal period for each candidate. Rebuttals may be used in order of 3 ways. To respond, you can respond directly to a point or position raised by another candidate after you've answered the question. You can also to challenge or to clarify an issue related to the topics being discussed, or to ask a question of another candidate. Rebuttals are not required, but are encouraged when relevant. Please keep rebuttals focused, professional, and related to the topic at hand. Please avoid interruptions. There will be a maximum of 2 rounds of rebuttals, including responses to rebuttals. So some housekeeping is, again, once, please turn off cell phones to off or set to silent during the debate. Most importantly, we ask everyone to follow guiding principles of respect and fairness as taught by our elders. Please be respectful to all participants, candidates, and community members. In front here, right here, Richard, he will have a sign up when you have 30 seconds left for your response. So he's our timing system. Candidates will have a brief grace period before microphones are muted, and the debate will be live streamed and recorded for public viewing. So now we will begin with opening statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes, and we'll go in reverse alphabetical order. So tonight again, I'd like to welcome our candidates. Kate White from the Yukon New Democratic Party leader and candidate for Takini. We have Cynthia James. Cynthia James is, sorry, my notes are. Liberal Party for Southern Lakes. Yes. Okay, and we also have Curry Dixon, Yukon Party leader and candidate for Copperbelt North. So tonight we are going to begin our opening statements with Kate White from the Yukon New Democratic Party. So Kate, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Kate White and I'm the leader of the Yukon NDP. Thank you both to Rose and Blair for the introduction and for acknowledging the traditional territories where tonight's meeting is taking place. And I also want to thank the First Nations Chamber, not only for the debate, but for the work that your members do across the territory. The most inspiring economic initiatives in Yukon today are coming directly from First Nations development corporations and businesses. Whether that's in housing, energy, construction, earthworks, you name it, right now First Nations are leading. And that really gives me hope for the future. So if you were tuned in yesterday, I'm going to give you the heads up. You're going to recognize some of my themes. And that's because Yukoners from Old Crow to Whistle Bend, from Beaver Creek to Watson Lake, they keep telling me that we need to improve access to healthcare and that we need to lower costs. So no surprise, that's what I'm going to talk about. And that's what we're talking about. That's what we're focused on, making sure that this place that we love is a place where every Yukoner can afford to build a good life. Whether it's in Watson Lake or Ross River, whether it's in Old Crow or Whistle Bend. And I'm hearing from healthcare workers in our communities, like one I just met this week. So he's covering for a colleague on stress leave. We don't know how long he's going to be off. But so now it's all on him. He's either working or he's on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because they're short-staffed. It's not acceptable. And then later that day, I met up with an elder who has to drive to Whitehorse for basic care because when the health center is short-staffed, it means that the health center can only deal with emergencies. It's all but closed. And this isn't the fault of the people working there. They haven't been supported. And I'm hearing from hardworking Yukoners who are having to decide right now for the very first time in their lives which grocery items will they leave on the shelf. What will they leave behind today? And I'm hearing from people who can't believe that we're on the hook again for yet another mining disaster. And they just keep adding up. You've got Wolverine, Minto, and now the Eagle Mine. hundreds of millions of dollars. And so I want to be clear, the Yukon NDP is calling for a public inquiry, not just into the Eagle Mine, but into all three, because we can't keep making the same mistakes. I believe that we can do better, and I believe that we need to do better. We can deliver better healthcare in our communities so that elders don't need to spend hours on the road for basic care. We can lower prices, and we can make things more accessible for Yukoners no matter where they live. I want you to know that you can count on my team, that you can count on me, because I'm committed to doing things better. So I thank you all for being here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your opening remarks, Kate. I'll now move to Cynthia James from the Yukon Liberal Party.
Good evening, everyone. I want to begin. I know that we've already done land acknowledging, but I'm going to do that again. I want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here in Whitehorse on the traditional territories of my father's people that belong to the Gunta First Nation and the Taonquechan Council, who I also have many relatives, and I've worked there. So my name is Cynthia James. My Tlingit name is Kuakshune. I'm from Carcross-Tagish First Nation, and I belong to the Ducklawady clan. I also want to thank our host and the Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce for bringing us together for this very important discussion, and to our wonderful moderator, Rose Cruikshank, who started us off in a good way. So Gunta Rose. It's a good reminder of why we're here, to listen, to learn, and to talk about how we move forward together. This conversation about business, opportunity, and partnerships is one that's close to my heart. I grew up surrounded by people who taught me the importance of community, hard work, and respect. It's a different type of experience to grow up in a rural community in the Yukon as a Yukon First Nation person. And that's the spirit I bring into this conversation tonight. For the Yukon Liberals, our work is grounded in 5 key priorities: housing, healthcare, affordability, a strong economy, and a partnerships rooted in reconciliation. It's challenging to live right now, and I am a single mother, and so these pillars really resonate with me. Each of these priorities connects directly to the strength of our businesses and the health of our community. Going forward in a whole approach instead of, it's not just healthcare; it's everything that we have to approach in the Yukon in this different climate. We're already seeing that future takes shape with First Nation owned and operated businesses. I am a small business owner in economic reconciliation. I know what this means. Assets and development corporations are leading the way. From renewable energy to tourism, from construction to cultural industries, Yukon First Nations are building a future that's strong, sustainable, and rooted to this land. That's the future we believe in, and it's one I know my Liberal colleagues believe in too. Our passion is clear. We will work respectfully and in partnership to make sure reconciliation isn't just a word, it's the way we do business in this territory. Gunta.
Thank you, Cynthia, for your opening remarks. We'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rose, and thank you for the opening prayer, for acknowledging the traditional territories that we're having this discussion on. Thank you so much to Blair as well for not only your leadership here tonight, but for taking on the reins of the Yukon First Nations Chamber of Commerce. My name is Curry Dixon. I'm the leader of the Yukon Party, and I'd like to begin by recognizing our host this evening, the Yukon First Nations Chamber of Commerce. It's hard to believe, for me at least, that just 11 years ago, this organization was just getting off the ground. I was actually the Minister of Economic Development back then, and I recall the nascent movement to start up an organization that could speak on behalf of the Yukon First Nation business community. And after just over a decade, it's truly impressive to see how far this organization has come and how important it's become to the business community across the territory. Today's economy has been shaped in so many ways by the contributions of First Nations governments, development corporations, First Nation businesses, and individual First Nations entrepreneurs. When you look at the vision of the Yukon First Nations Chamber of Commerce, that it would become a champion for the inclusion of First Nation businesses and development corporations in Yukon's economy. It's not hard to see this organization having had considerable success over the past decade. But as successful as you have been as an organization, I'm optimistic that there is so much more opportunity ahead. I think that with the right partnerships, with the right vision, and by working together, we can go even further and achieve even more. And that's the vision I want to share with you this evening. A strong, growing economy built on the foundations of our traditional industries, but increasingly diversified and innovative. An economy that includes a prominent place for First Nations businesses and citizens. And one that strives for even more. More success, more employment, more growth, and even more wealth generation. And we know that Yukon First Nations businesses are growing and thriving, and that when they're growing and thriving, our economy will grow and thrive along with them. And so it is our vision to support that and continue that as we move forward. And we look forward to offering a change in the next election to one that advances that growth, that partnership, and that opportunity. So I look forward to sharing that with you tonight. I thank my colleagues for their opening statements, and I look forward to having this discussion. Thank you very much, Rose.
Okay, thank you for your opening remarks, candidates. I'll now dive right into questions for our debate. So a little bit of instruction is I have done the draws for who answers the questions first. We'll hear from everybody a response to the question, and then I'll move to the next person behind the opening speaker to either one, they can ask a question of another candidate, or you can respond to another candidate's statement, or three, you can ask another candidate to expand or clarify their statements. So, is that clear? Okay, I'll say it again. Okay, so number one, okay, what you can do after you've done your opening, you all respond first. Okay. So, for example, this first response or response to the question is going to start with Kate, and then we're going to go to Curry, and then we're going to go to Cynthia. So, and then for the first chance to either number one, ask a question of another candidate will be Curry. So you can ask, okay, question of another candidate, or you can respond to another statement from a candidate, or you can expand and clarify your own statement, is what I meant to say. So 3 things that you can do. Got it?
Give it a go.
Okay, I'll repeat it till we get going, okay? So it's like a little bit of tongue twisty here. So, okay, so the very first question, okay, Kate, Curry, then Cynthia, is Yukon, its procurement and economic inclusion. So the Yukon First Nations procurement policy has failed to meet its own goals. According to the 2023-24 MRC annual report, contracts awarded to Yukon First Nation businesses, oops, sorry. I lost my thing here. Nope, sorry, gotta back up. Sorry, I got my papers mixed up for the questions. Okay, here we go, sorry. Don't have them stapled together, so they're falling all apart, so. Okay, the Yukon First Nations procurement policy failed to meet its own goals. According to the 2023-24 MRC annual report, contracts awarded to Yukon First Nation businesses remain well below the 15% target. At 6.9% of total contract value, and the percentage targets for Indigenous procurement has proven unrealistic and largely imminent. Our membership has communicated that the current interaction of the procurement policy has caused confusion, restriction, legitimate Indigenous companies from being listed in the Yukon First Nation Business Registry, and failed to keep up with modern business structures. Beyond the policy itself, the Yukon government bids and tenders website was so frustrating to use that Yukon Connects was created by a Yukon company to provide user-friendly system. So the question for you is, how will your government ensure that Yukon First Nation businesses have fair, consistent, and meaningful access to government contracts? And what specific actions will you take to make inclusion measurable and enforceable? And what improvements would you like to make to the policy? So first to answer, we'll go to Kate White from the Yukon New Democratic Party.
Thanks. Just a really small, minor question there. So if we look at how everything works right now, and it's easy to understand that the bids and tender website doesn't work, and you hear that from businesses across the plains. Like no one is going to say, I went to the website, I understood what I needed to do, and I was able to get the paperwork submitted in the correct way. And it has been a problem for a really long time. When we talk about the 6.9% compared to the 15%, what I have heard from businesses, for example, folks who do brushing along highways, instead of the contracts being broken up into bite-sized pieces for contracts that are for companies that are smaller, it's tendered in such a way that only companies from down south are able to apply. And when those companies from down south apply, there is no economic trickle to communities. We're not hiring local people, we're not encouraging people to learn, and we're not giving them those opportunities. And when we look at procurement and when we look at opportunity and we talk about business and business growth, really, it's not going to come from government where the solutions are, it's going to come from businesses themselves. And so I appreciate that the First Nation Chamber of Commerce is the one that holds the, they hold the book of who qualifies and who doesn't. And I think if we're hearing from folks that it doesn't work, then we need to relook at it. Ultimately, the goal between the First Nations procurement policy was really to make sure that there was that economic fairness and that there was that opportunity. And if we're not achieving that goal, then it means that we have to relook at it and we have to make it work. And I've heard from others who said it's not fair and that some businesses that shouldn't qualify, and some businesses that should qualify don't qualify. And then we hear how you can't put, companies are having a hard time coming together to bid on those bigger things. And so really, I think it's about taking a big step back and figuring it out. And so we've had lots of conversation in the chamber about procurement and how it works and how it doesn't. But this just really reflects what I hear across the territory. So whether it's brushing from a casket company in Watson Lake, or whether it's roadworks in Trondheim, we can definitely do better.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Well, thank you very much, Rose. It's an excellent question. I'll start by saying that the First Nations procurement policy was grounded in Chapter 22 of the Umbrella Final Agreement and meant to be a way to implement that chapter. The Yukon Party is a firm supporter of Chapter 22 of the UFA and its implementation. Likewise, we support the intent behind the Yukon First Nations procurement policy to enhance economic opportunities and increase the participation of Yukon First Nations citizens and businesses in the territory's economy. With that said, though, we do have concerns about the structure of the YFNPP and believe that there's been significant challenges with its implementation. Those concerns include inconsistencies with the policy's implementation, challenges with enforcement, and the perception of the policy being abused. These concerns and many others have also been raised by the business community, including both First Nations and non-First Nations businesses, the courts, the various committees and groups that have studied this policy, including the ones you referenced earlier, Rose. We believe that with careful consideration, thoughtful engagement with Yukon First Nation businesses, as well as non-First Nation businesses, and consultation with the leadership of First Nations governments, that changes and adjustments can be made to the policy to address these concerns. And to be clear, our view is that the policy needs to be improved. It does not need to be eliminated. The policy can be fixed, in my view, but I think we need to start by addressing some of the considerable concerns, and the question that was given today by the First Nation Chamber of Commerce outlines some of the serious concerns that exist with the policy in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Cynthia James from the Yukon Liberal Party.
Also, as a child of the Umbrella Final Agreement, I take all the chapters very seriously, but this one in particular we have a heavy lift in the Yukon in economic reconciliation. So in procurement and economic inclusion, Yukon First Nation governments and their respective development corporations play a critical role in growing and diversifying the Yukon's economy. This is central to the implementation of Chapter 22 of the Umbrella Final Agreements, and we are committed to supporting the objectives laid out in the agreement. I happen to have a tattoo of Chapter 22. Oh. So I take it fairly seriously. I'd like to take a moment to touch on the First Nation procurement policy. It's still relatively new, just like self-government, and the Yukon for that matter. And we strongly believe in its intent, supporting economic reconciliation and creating real opportunities for Yukon First Nation businesses. At the same time, we know there are challenges. We need to make sure we're truly using First Nations consultants and businesses, but we are also need to look at how the government engages with these businesses. All of our relationships matter. When we know the policy isn't perfect, and we need to review it regularly, perhaps every 5 years, because economic reconciliation will continue to evolve over time. We also recognize that the Yukon Party has spoken about canceling the program, and you said you've corrected that today, that you would be working with that, so that's wonderful. We believe that, throwing it out would be starting at square one, and I don't know if we can afford to do that at this point. I think it's a good case study, and we have a lot of information that we can, best practices and what to do and what not to do. At the same time, we need to fix the policy challenges, improve guidance and education, and make sure it truly supports First Nation businesses while advancing economic reconciliation in practice. Economic reconciliation is action, and increasing employment and training opportunities for Yukon First Nations through procurement activities is an important part of the work that needs to be done as well. We need training, and I believe the Yukon University in all partnerships could be involved in that, in entrepreneurship as well. So, Ganeshish.
Thank you for your responses to question number 1. I'll now move to Curry Dixon from the Yukon Party leader to either ask a question of another candidate or respond to another candidate's statement, or expand and clarify your own statement in regards to this question.
Well, I think, Rose, that I generally agree with what my colleagues on the stage have said so far, so no disagreement here, and I don't think any further clarification is needed.
Thank you for that. I'll now move to Cynthia James for Yukon Liberal Party to either ask a question of another candidate, respond to another candidate's statement, or to expand and clarify your own statement.
I think at this point I'm okay.
Okay, I'll now move to Kate White from the Yukon New Democratic Party to either ask a question of another candidate. I'm going to repeat this a few times. Respond to another candidate's statement, or expand and clarify your own statement. What we're trying to do is create some dialogue. So we'll get into this as we move along. So you have 1 minute.
I think we're in agreement, so this is not going to be the one that I challenge.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to add part of another, we'll have a quick response to this question from each of you. I'll go in the same order. I'll start with Kate, then go to Curry, and then to Cynthia. In your first 100 days, what actions would you take and how would you work with First Nations and businesses to measure performance? Want me to repeat that? In your first 100 days, what actions would you take and how would you work with First Nations and businesses to measure performances? So again, Kate White from Yukon NDP.
Thank you. So the challenge with that is the term actually performances, because I'd say within the first 100 days, it's really about building relationship. I've heard from First Nation leadership around the territory that there's a lot of times where those relationships are strained. Within the first 100 days, I'd call the public inquiry. Eagle Mine, Wolverine, Minto. So that would be the start. When we talk about businesses, it is about opening those doors and having those conversations. So I would expect that we would meet with the First Nation Chamber, probably with some of their steering committee. We would have the conversations with procurement. There would be HPW at the table. But I think within that first 100 days, really, it's going to be relationship building. I don't think we can have any really big, meaningful conversation if we don't set the table in the right way. And so for us, it's the public inquiry, and then we go from there.
Thank you for your response. Now to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Can I just clarify, Rose? When you said measure performances, do you mean the performance of the First Nations procurement policy, and the performance metrics that you suggested in the first question, or just performances of something else?
Performances in general for the procurement policy. For what exactly will you do?
Okay, that's what I thought, and okay. So I think that the way to address the First Nations procurement policy is to begin at the leadership level, and so I think the natural place for that would be to call a Yukon Forum in the first 100 days. And seek some direction from the political leadership of both the Yukon government and the First Nations government around fixing this. I think that there is a consensus amongst First Nations leadership that this policy does need to be fixed, and I think that the way to do that is by having that government-to-government discussion around how best to do it. Without prescribing sort of the actions that will flow from that directly, my suggestion would probably be that we would want to have a group of people with some expertise in the procurement field from both the First Nation business side, procurement side, and others to come together and do a careful study of the work that's been done on the policy so far. We know there's significant problems with it. I think the starting point for those is probably the 2023 court case, which found the policy to be, well, in the words of the justice at the time, opaque and unfair when it came to the registration of, sorry, right out of time, there we go.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
In the first 100 days, again, I agree with my colleague, or my colleagues, thank you, that, 100 days is, it might be a long time, but not in how you have to approach working with each First Nation on a very important topic like procurement. I think really, what does Chapter 22 mean? I know individually, as a jurisdiction, it means something very different than to a Yukoner. And I just want to highlight that I am a Canadian, I am a First Nation, Yukon First Nation citizen of Carcross-Tagish First Nation, but I also under the Indian Act of Canada. So a Yukon First Nation person is a walking jurisdiction of varying different rights and title, and falls under different jurisdictions. And so that's the navigation that I've found in my own personal experience of navigating my own business. So, Ganeshish.
Thank you for that. For that response, we'll now again once go around for this question. We'll start with Curry. If you want to ask a question of another candidate's response to this question, you can. You can respond to another candidate's statement, or you can expand and clarify anything in your own statement.
Okay, no disagreement, I think, with anything I've heard here so far, and I think I've explained that I think the approach that we would take to the First Nation procurement policy. So.
Thank you for that. I'll now move to Cynthia James from the Yukon Liberal Party.
I would love to elaborate if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I have been working on the Yukon BC Grid Connect project, and I came in as a consultant, and the position found me. The CEO came because of my economic reconciliation and my background working with my Yukon First Nation Trust for Carcross-Tagish First Nation, of which I'm both on leave right now. But in the approach of all of that, how we attract proponents, how we attract investors, how we attract these people or these organizations or the financial sector to come and to our shiny Yukon is something. But when you get here, how are you going to walk on our land and water, and how are you going to treat our people? And so that alignment, I think, that's something that economic reconciliation means to me, to sit at these tables and to invest into Yukon, but also to how are you treating our people in this industry or any industry, whether it's construction or what have you. Ganeshish.
Thank you for that response, Cynthia. We'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP.
Thank you. So First Nation businesses are some of the people who filed liens when Wolverine went under, and they are owed money since the Eagle Mine disaster. So my question to the other two is, are you committed to calling a public inquiry into the Minto mine closure, the Wolverine mine closure, and the Eagle Mine disaster?
Okay, we'll start with Curry for your response.
Okay, well, I'll start with the Eagle Mine. Of course, there's been an independent review that looked at the technical causes of what happened at that mine site, and I thought that the independent review board did an excellent job at coming up with recommendations for both regulators and industry about how to respond going forward. My understanding is the government's accepted all of the recommendations and is moving to implement those. I think that that's the correct path, that we need to respond to those recommendations. When it comes to a public inquiry, I don't think that a public inquiry is the right course of action immediately. But like I said earlier this week at a previous debate, I'd be happy to talk to the Gunta First Nation about that and determine if that's a course of action that needs to be taken. When it comes to other projects like Minto, I don't see any role for a public inquiry in what could be a very positive story with the Selkirk First Nation taking over the ownership of an operating mine, the first Indigenous government in Canada to own a mine.
Thank you for your response, Curry. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
I'm a freshie, so I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Thank you. Okay, there we go. Yay, thank you for your question and your elaboration. That's what we want to get going here. Yeah, we're getting it. Okay, next question, number 2. So we're going to start with Cynthia James from Yukon Liberal Party, followed by Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader, and Kate from the Yukon NDP. And I'm saying these over and over because there are people online. So we need to make sure that they know who is speaking, because sometimes it can be difficult. So, okay, question number 2 is, infrastructure and connectivity are the backbone of economic growth and community well-being across the Yukon. Yet, many Yukon First Nation businesses, particularly in rural and remote communities, continue to experience gaps and challenges such as limited broadband access, unreliable power infrastructure, and housing shortages that constrain workforce mobility and limit the competitive advantage of businesses. These challenges not only affect daily life for everyone, but also limit the ability of First Nation-owned businesses to grow, access markets, and compete for regional contracts. Addressing infrastructure and connectivity gaps through projects such as the BC Grid Connection are essential to advancing self-determination, economic inclusion, and long-term sustainability for Yukon First Nations and their business partners. So your question is, how important is this issue to you? And what concrete commitments will your party make to work with First Nation businesses to build critical infrastructure in both Whitehurst and rural communities? So I'll go to Cynthia, you're first.
Thank you, Rose. The Yukon is showing strong growth, and there is a need to keep pace with this growth. That means new schools, expansions of our hospitals and healthcare facilities, replacing and modernizing infrastructure, and keeping up with the delivery of services that Yukoners expect. Part of the path forward, in our view, is ensuring that essential infrastructure is built and in many cases owned by Yukon First Nation governments and development corporations. That infrastructure can then be leased back to Yukoners, creating local ownership, long-term economic benefits, and stronger communities. We believe it is time for Yukon First Nations to be part of the ownership model for new infrastructure built in the territory, including schools, hospitals, and in fact, perhaps treatment centers. We are supportive of Yukon First Nation governments and development corporations' involvement in ownership of assets, and will continue to partner where appropriate. We are major, stewards of the land, and this is a part of the self-determination in how we wish to use our lands in economic development.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Oh, thank you very much. A very broad question, obviously, covering housing, roads, power. So I'll start on the energy side because you talked about the BC-Yukon interconnect. I think that the BC-Yukon interconnect is a good long-term goal for sure. I know it's something that's very large. It's very long-term. It's something that'll take a considerable investment from outside the Yukon, namely from the Government of Canada. And while it's a laudable goal and something we should be working towards, it doesn't change the fact that we need to continue to invest in our energy infrastructure today. We know that we've been operating close to the limit of our grid for the past number of years, and that we need to see more dependable, reliable capacity added to our grid system. That's why the Yukon Energy Corporation is proposing such a large investment in a number of thermal power centers here in Whitehorse and a number of energy projects around the territory. I think that presents, though, some tremendous opportunity for Yukon First Nations to participate in both the ownership and operation of some of these generation assets. I think there's an opportunity for First Nations development corporations, governments, and businesses to participate in these generation facilities. I think that there's a model out there that's been successful. It doesn't have to be the only model we use, but I look at the partnership that was struck between the Yukon government and the Kwanlin-Dun First Nation around the 3 LNG plants that are down by the dam. Those have created economic benefits for the Kwanlin-Dun since they were installed. There's room for more of that. There's room for that on the renewable side. There's room for that on thermal. And I think that we should be looking at a more clearly established process for First Nations-led energy projects that gives First Nations and their partners certainty about how long the process for negotiating and concluding an energy purchase agreement will take, and will allow us to work with First Nations to solve those problems that we all face. I don't think time will allow me to get too much more to roads and housing, but of course there's opportunity in both those things as well.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP.
Thank you very much. So I'm actually going to tackle housing first. I've been elected for almost 14 years, and we've been in a housing crisis since the day I was elected. So 14 years, 2 days from now. But what we have seen, which we didn't see before, was the biggest drive in the construction of rental housing ever, led by a development corporation. Data Guy is the biggest commercial landlord outside of Yukon government. And not only that, but they are a better landlord. Their buildings cost them less to build. They've gone so far as now they've built a construction company that builds the buildings that house the people. And it's not just for their citizens, it's for all Yukoners. And so if we build on and see that, and we recognize that First Nation development corporations are actually the answer to the housing crisis across the territory. When we talk about rural Yukon where we can't have teachers, well, we can't have teachers because there's nowhere for them to live. However, if Yukon government worked with the First Nations Development Corporation to build those houses, we would have housing for teachers and for healthcare workers and for highways and public works and citizens in those communities. And so the solution exists. It's like plain. And every time I think about outside of Whitehorse, I think, this is the opportunity. We can follow the path. I'm really excited to see what Chuniquan does with the Kwanlin-Dun land on Range Road. It's going to be a big neighborhood when it's established. And so what we can see right now is the path forward, and the path forward is working together, and it's not being in the way. And so the Yukon NDP are excited to be partners in that because we have seen the success, and I think there's a wide opportunity to have that go farther. So housing, it's very exciting.
Okay, thank you for your response to the questions. Now I'm going to move to Kate White from the Yukon NDP to either ask a question of another candidate, respond to another candidate's statement, or expand and clarify your own statement.
Thanks. So I've been elected for 14 years, and in 14 years, I've seen 2 consecutive governments not invest in energy infrastructure. Never once. That always went to the ratepayer. Every single person in this room has paid for all those upgrades. Congratulations, you own part of the Yukon grid. And it's very expensive. And it should have always been a government infrastructure. It should have been treated like highways. It should have been treated like schools or buildings. So my question for both is, will you invest in energy infrastructure like it's infrastructure, or will you continue to have it go back to rate?
Okay, I will move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Okay. Well, the short answer is yes, of course. It's not accurate that we haven't invested in infrastructure in the grid. I just gave an example of the LNG plant that was built in partnership with the Kwanlundun First Nation during our time in government last time around. That was the last time that dependable generation capacity was added to our grid. That's the last new dependable capacity that was added to our grid up until this point. And so there's room for more of that. There's opportunities for plenty more of that. And I agree with Kate that can be done in partnership with Yukon First Nations.
Thank you for your response, Curry. I'll now move to Cynthia James from the Yukon Liberal Party for your response. Will you invest in?
Of course.
In energy infrastructure. Yeah, okay. Can I add to that? Yes, you can. You have time.
Thank you. You know, I think that the structure of our Yukon First Nation self-governments, there's a system there that is supposed to be working, and I, as the chair, I'm taking a leave, chair of my trust, there's a succession planning that could happen perhaps with you know, where we could go. I look at what our compensation dollar trust will be worth in 20 years, and who knows? So there's lots to explore, and I think that we are in a good space to be creative about all of these topics and work together. So, Ganashish.
Thank you for that. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader. If you would like to ask a question of another candidate, respond to another candidate's statement, or expand and clarify your own statement.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that I agree very much with what Kate said about the opportunity in housing in partnership with First Nations in rural communities for the development of housing. I think that was an excellent point, and I agree with that as well.
Thank you. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party. If you'd like to ask a question of another candidate, respond to another candidate's statement, or expand and clarify your own.
I just really look forward to how we can build a better Yukon, so collaboratively.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for your responses to that question. We're now going to move on to question number 3. In the order for response to that, I have Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader, then Kate White, Yukon NDP Leader, and Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party. So question number 3, access to capital remains one of the biggest barriers for Yukon First Nation entrepreneurs and development corporations. Many face restrictions on lending against settlement land or a lack of tailored investment programs. The question here is, what action would you take immediately to review and revise the government approach to address the barriers, and how will you work with lenders and federal partners to create investment tools that are accessible to all communities? So again, we'll start with Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Well, thank you very much. So it starts with diagnosing the problem. Of course, we need to acknowledge that there are opportunities that exist today where First Nations development corporations have access to lending institutions like the Canada Infrastructure Bank that have preferable rates that can create opportunities for development corporations to borrow. But we certainly recognize that's not the only answer, and that the traditional lending institutions can put up barriers for First Nation development corporations and others to access capital. There's been proposals around the country on this. We've seen opportunities and programs in Ontario. There's the Alberta Indigenous Investment Opportunities in Alberta, of course, that is one model. I think it comes down to sitting down with First Nations and identifying how we want to proceed with that and finding solutions together. Ultimately, there is a role for government to play in either backstopping or supporting First Nations development corporations in accessing capital. But it's important that we do that because we know that there's a huge infrastructure gap out there in the Territory, whether it's on roads, schools, energy, any of these issues. And the fiscal capacity of the Yukon government is only so much. So we need to work in partnership. We need to access capital from other institutions and find ways, creative solutions to allow First Nations to take a much bigger role in the investment in our infrastructure.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP Party.
Thank you very much. So I had a conversation with Yukon Energy fairly recently where they said what really needed to happen was they needed a government to make a call for power, to be able to say that we are looking for partners and we would like you to bring your projects. And then I had a conversation with a development corporation and then another development corporation and another one, and they all said, we'd like to be part of the solution for power. But the way that happens and the way that access to capital can happen is actually the government saying, this is what we're looking for. This is, we're looking for renewable energy, reliable in winter. What have you got? And this gives the opportunity for a development corporation to come forward with that proposal. And with that relationship, they have the access to capital in a way they didn't before. And I think what would be even more incredible, because we've seen small projects, not small, Copper Nisu and White River First Nation led by John Vandermeer, biggest diesel offset in Yukon. Or we can look at the wind turbines that the Yukon Party wasn't in favor of in the 2011s, but they're up there now. We can look at Kluane First Nation with their wind turbine. And so there's an opportunity right now for a government to say, we're ready. We want to support you and you bringing your projects forward. What have you got? And so I think when we look at energy, that this is a real opportunity. And it is the solution and how we get there. And so I've already made the commitment that we will do a call for power like we've seen in British Columbia and make that the next step.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
Access to capital and financing. We would like to explore the creation of a liaison and navigator position to support Yukon First Nations in navigating the various funds available through federal governments, agencies, and otherwise, including the Indigenous Growth Fund, funding for Indigenous housing, Aboriginal Entrepreneurship Program, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, First Nation Bank of Canada, and our very own Dananaya Ventures. Past example of government supporting Yukon First Nation investments include 2019, the government of Yukon provided $2 million to the Yukon First Nation Investment Corporation to support its overall investments of $5 million into Panache, a Canadian venture capital fund. 3 additional Yukon First Nation development corporations partnerships have subsequently been created following the model that was established to enable the Panache Ventures Agreement. The Yukon First Nation Investment LP builds investment capacity and enables partners to explore larger deals. The Yukon First Nation Telco LP covers telecommunications and was able to negotiate a $10 million deal that has provided $400,000 in cash flow reinvested into the Yukon's economy. And the Yukon First Nation Energy LP is exploring investments in energy initiatives, including green energy. How much time do I have? Okay, great. So communicating about grid and having a capital call, it would be lovely, but I think we have to really dig into our energy literacy here in the Yukon and really look. When I first got to work on Yukon BC Grid Connect project as a consultant, I was like, I didn't even know without YDC owned the YEC, and I also was like, there was a lot of zigging and zagging with all of these energy, there's just a lot going on, and I think we really need to look at each of these roles and responsibilities at a high level and really get to know our roles as in approaching them, and not perhaps look at it in phases of how this could look in. And I would love to have renewable energy opportunities, and in fact, we do have many of them. However, in our aging infrastructure in the Yukon, our aging energy infrastructure, it would be problematic. And I'm no energy expert. However, we have to really look into what that would look like. And grid, in the long game, would provide an avenue to be able to sell power back to BC. So, Gunashish.
Thank you for your response, Cynthia. Now I'll start with you again. If you would like to ask a question from the other candidates based on their response to this question, or if you'd like to expand or clarify your own statement or respond to another candidate's statement.
In the conversation about energy, this succession planning, what that would look like, we need energy leadership in the Yukon, and especially at a Yukon First Nation table. And in the aspect of building renewables, leading with the economic development, arms of our governments, and in partnership with the Yukon government, we really would benefit from beginning to look at what it would mean at that energy table and who we would need from our nations, and really start looking at training and mentorship for that, and through community energy planning. Gunashish.
Thank you. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP. If you'd like to ask a question of another candidate, respond to another candidate's statement, or expand and clarify your own.
Let's talk energy. So the first thing we want to do when we talk about affordability is we want to freeze the rate increase that's coming. And the way we're going to do that is that we are going to take on the burden. The 3 new diesel thermals that need to go in, they need to go in to make the grid sustainable. Mayo B needs the work. And I'm not prepared to make all of you pay for it. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we go back to my government call for power, because we need to be sustainable, and then we need to go to renewable. And it's not one that happens, like renewable is not going to happen right now. Those thermal plants, Mayo B, that has to happen now. And then we move towards the renewable. But the reality is for 4 years, I've heard about like the nation building grid connect, but I haven't heard about what we're going to do right now. And so for me, it would be great. The federal government wants to pay, that's great, but we have to do something first. And so we have a plan, and it's a good plan. And I have talked about it with lots of people in power. By that I mean power generation, so people who make power. And so it's feasible. So there's steps, and I know them.
Thank you for that elaboration, Kate. And I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader. Which would you like to do? Ask a question?
I'll bite on the question. I'm just genuinely curious now. Kate's mentioned the call for power. Would the call for power include thermal generation, or would it be limited to renewables?
That's the beauty. Government gets to decide. So we can say we would like renewable energy that is reliable in winter. A nation could say, well, we've got a really good idea, and we think we would like to put thermal here, and a battery, and wind. But then a nation gets to come forward with their own proposal. So it's not about dictating, but we as government get to start, yes, I would like renewable. I would like it reliable in the winter. And that's the beauty of it.
I'll now, thank you for your response. I'll now move to Cynthia for your response.
I think our Yukon would benefit becoming real shiny to attract international investors into our energy and our renewable projects.
Thank you for your responses for this. I'm going to ask one quick follow-up for this, for each of you. We're not going to do any questioning after, just a response. Oh, no, sorry. I'll leave that till after the break. So we're going to go into a break, a 10-minute break. And again, I want to to let everybody know that you can hand your cards back there because they are compiling all the questions that we will be asking later on. We're going to come back to questions in regarding to mining and energy and major projects, the Yukon, training in the workforce, and a Northern Vision and sovereignty. So we'll be coming back in 10 minutes. So I think we are just about right on time. So about 11 minutes after 8, we'll come back. Continue on to our next set of questions. And in response order, we will have Cynthia James, followed by Curry Dixon, and then Kate White. So question number 4. A skilled and reliable workforce is essential to the success of Yukon's economy, and particularly to the success of Yukon First Nation businesses. Yet many Indigenous-owned companies continue to face persistent challenges in attracting, training, and retaining qualified workers. Limited access to trade certification programs in rural communities, gaps between education and employment opportunities, and the need for culturally relevant training models have all contributed to ongoing labor shortages. So your question here is, how will your party invest in workforce development so that Yukon First Nation businesses have the workforce available to grow and succeed in a modern Yukon? So I'll start with Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party candidate.
Thank you, Rose. We all recognize the need for more support in communities to get youth involved and keep them engaged throughout their lives, beginning at a young age. We need to work with Yukon University to ensure they are filling the needs of our communities, and this may look different in each community and needs to evolve with the needs of our territory as sectors emerge and needs to change. For example, the Grid Connect project in the future. Renewable energy is an opportunity as well, and those renewable energy projects, or the possibilities of them in the Yukon, again comes back to energy leadership in our community energy planning, and being strategic and keeping it simple. We don't have to overcomplicate these processes. The Center of Northern Innovation in Mining is doing good work on this front for the sector. When we look at opportunities that exist in communities, First Nations need to be at the table, taking the lead on what their citizens want to see for their future, to look at the economic opportunities and ensure that the investments being made and the industries doing business on their land, on our land, reflect and protect their interests now and into the future. This needs to include succession planning, like I keep bringing up. If it is a mining project, Yukon First Nations need to be at the table from the beginning, looking at the full cycle of a project from exploration to development to reclamation. The development of a new labor market strategy is underway and much needed. Ensure that Yukon First Nation procurement policy is evolving for Yukon businesses and citizens alike to encourage workforce development. The expectation is that workforce liaison funding will contribute to the job readiness of citizens through the development of individualized employment assessments and training plans in collaboration with contractors and Yukon government procurement authorities. Connect citizens to workforce development programming to equip citizens with the experience, skills, and certifications needed at the job site. And identify training needs, opportunities, and programs for community needs within government, industry, and relevant organizations. We need to be engaging with Yukon First Nation partners, industry stakeholders, and other government departments to refine and enhance the policy component on workforce development. Ganeshtish.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Thank you very much. I think as a starting point, what I would say is that I think we need to be putting a strong new focus on the trades. I think that we need to continue to make the trades an attractive, viable option for our young people, and ensure that the skills and skills development opportunities to develop those trades are made available. I look at what the Yukon First Nations School Board's been doing around trades development and getting that into the schools, and I think that there's a real positive model there where we can build on that in the rest of Yukon schools. I think that not all learners learn the same way, and that giving the trades, promoting the trades as an opportunity for alternative models of learning, I think has tremendous potential. And so whether that's the creation of a program modeled on the skills development program we see in Ontario, which allows First Nations, communities, unions, organizations to apply for funding to host and provide skills and training, or things like building on some of the success we've seen with Wildland Fire. The Yukon First Nations Wildland Fire hosts the Warrior Program, which gives skills and training opportunities to young people to help them reach their goals and to enter the workforce. I think that there's a very successful model there that deserves support, and I know that the First Nations Wildland Fire is looking to expand that program as well. So I think that there's opportunity for growth there. I think there's opportunity for more investment, and I think that we need to be promoting the trades as a real alternative, an opportunity to not only meet the needs of our economy, but continue to give folks the skills they need to succeed in the economy.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP.
Thank you. I'm a ticketed tradesperson, and I have 5 other ticketed tradesperson on my docket, because trades really do matter. And I say this as a person who just in 2019, when I became the leader of the party, finally made more than the last time I was a camp cook. So I'd been elected for 6 or 7 years before I out-earned myself as a camp cook. Trades really are, and I love hearing that Curry's there now because he wasn't when he was in government, so it's cool that it's changed. But trades training is really, is opening, it opens doors. So there is opportunity and there is a requirement that we do it in a way that makes sense for communities. So if we look at the success of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation Tiny Home Program, where there was on-the-ground trades training with union support, with industry support in the community. And so not only that, but citizens were building houses, and they were learning trades, and they were supported to do it, and then there were houses that people could live in. And so it worked. And so we've heard from the trades unions, the Carpenters Union, that they think that they're better suited to do this than Yukon University. I don't disagree. And it's about going to where people are when they need that. And it's about making sure that people have the support to do those things. There are so many opportunities when we look at trades. I mean, it has been disappointing for me that for 14 years, I could ask how many apprentices did Yukon government have, and the answer was like 4. Once it was 5. But Chris Dunbar, who is our candidate in Porter Creek North, he has done an incredible job in his job in Highways and Public Works of expanding the number of apprentices in that department, because he changed the entire way it was done. He made sure that there were supports in place. He made sure that women were coming into those positions and new Canadians. And so when you come from a trades background, you look at problem solving. And so trades are really like, it's the opportunity. And when I talk to rural Yukon and folks in Yukon, you know, sometimes 2 people in Watson Lake, it's maybe not enough for the university, but it's sure enough to get that started in a different way. And so I can't wait. Let's support people to get into the trades.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to you again, Kate, to begin. Either you're going to ask a question, respond to another candidate's comments, or expand on your own.
I will take expansion, Rose.
Ding, ding.
So we've talked about how big, like major infrastructure projects in the Yukon, that so far it's really gone to the lowest bidder. And typically the lowest bidder is not the one that's like the community. It doesn't benefit the community. It doesn't build workforces. It doesn't leave things behind. What it does is sometimes in the really big projects, they actually fly employees in and then they fly them out. And they do that back and forth. And so there's an ability for government to say that we're gonna work on community benefit agreements. We're gonna put in a mandate to train, but we're gonna support communities so that that training can be successful. We're gonna make sure that there's supports there so those young apprentices or older apprentices or people who are entering that have the support to do the work. because government has the ability to say, this is our expectation. And my expectation is that we make sure that people have opportunities. So those good jobs exist in each of those communities where those big projects are. And so I think that builds on that trade initiative, and it's exciting.
Thank you for that expansion. I was thinking about Jeopardy too, in the categories. Okay, I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader. Will you take question, respond, or expand?
I guess I'll expand. The only thing I missed that I wanted to add was the opportunity to consider adding apprentices to the STEP program. I think that's something that we could look at as well. So that's the only piece I wanted to add.
Thank you for that. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
I would like to expand on what Kate was talking about impacts and benefits in our communities when we have large projects coming in. I think that early days is so important to begin working with engagement and whatever that means for the particular Yukon First Nation or the community that a proponent would be planning for. And those impacts, 30 seconds, okay. Looking at projects and future projects, it's going to mean something different for each nation to nation, and so making sure that that there's a team and that everybody's working together and that we're not missing things, or we're there to reduce harm in planning these projects. So, thanks.
Thank you for your responses to question number 4. Now we're going to move into a big question. And we're going to be starting with Cynthia James, followed by Kate White, then Curry Dixon for your response for this question. Yukon's mining, energy, and major project sector have faced growing challenges related to outdated legislation and limited infrastructure. But recent events, from mine closures to environmental and financial challenges, have raised serious concerns about how the sector is being managed and regulated. Recently, many Yukoners, including Yukon First Nations and businesses, have lost confidence in the government's ability to promote and steward stable, responsible, and compliant mining, energy, and major infrastructure projects. Looking ahead, we see growing national and global demand for critical minerals, renewable power, and northern infrastructure. Indigenous governments and development corporations are well positioned to become equity partners, project leaders, and environmental stewards in the next generation of Yukon's economic development. First Nations are major partners today on so many fronts, and partnerships are key, not just for First Nations success, but all Yukoners' success. So the question here is, what is your party's vision for the future of the Yukon's economy, and what's needed to ensure Yukon First Nations can be full partners in major project opportunities? So I will start with Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
As a freshie, I would acknowledge the harm of the mining disaster, and as a freshie, I feel like I'm in a space where I'm not going to comment on that particular mine. Mining remains an important part of our economy. Our critical mineral deposits are world-class, and global demand will continue to grow. But it's not just about our resources. It's about doing mining differently, responsibly, safely, and in partnership with Yukon First Nations and local communities. Continuing our joint work to draft new minerals legislation is critical to ensuring our legislation is working with everyone's interest in mind. Mining is a key economic foundation of the Yukon's economy and will be an important part of its future. Our critical mineral deposits are some of the best in the world and will only become more valuable in the global economy. The Yukon Liberal Party believes that the Yukon needs a modern, responsible mining industry, and we know that most, if not all, mining industry participants agree. We have been working hard to transform our systems and modernize our legislation to ensure that disasters like the Victoria Gold Eagle project don't happen again. It is critical that this work continue in partnership with both industry and Yukon First Nations. We have the opportunity to create a new system, the most innovative and progressive in Canada, that will create a prosperity for industry, Yukon First Nations, and Yukoners. The recent announcement in June that Selkirk First Nation made history as the first First Nation to assume ownership and operational control of a mining operation. This is a major milestone in Indigenous economic self-determination. As Selkirk First Nation moves from stakeholder to full owner and operator of a major industrial site on its settlement lands, setting a national precedent for Indigenous-led reclamation and development in Canada's mining sector. And you know, this is an opportunity to apply our own traditional knowledge, or not my own, but the opportunity that Selkirk First Nation could possibly use their own traditional knowledge and the ways of knowing and being and operating the mine. Yukon British, oh, is this ongoing? Sorry. Yeah. Yukon British Columbia Grid Connect project is committed to advancing this project with reconciliation. It is not going to be completed without that. As a core value, and continued discussions with Yukon First Nations on ownership and partnership opportunities. We'll support Yukon First Nations in developing their own community energy plans so that communities throughout the Yukon can participate in a stronger, more resilient grid. And this also ties into Arctic sovereignty and healthy communities. And when we bolster healthy communities with safe energy infrastructure, that is an Arctic security aspect.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP.
I pointed out yesterday that there's been 2 governments in power since the devolution transfer agreement that committed us to new minerals legislation. But that didn't get started until 2021 when we used the power that we had as 3 MLAs with a minority government, and we put successor resource legislation, now known as the new minerals legislation, on the docket. We can't talk about the critical minerals and we can't talk about a future of mining in the Yukon if we don't turn the page on the past. And the only way to do that is with new minerals legislation. I've had lots of conversations with chiefs, people around the table, and the concern is that nations wanted to go farther than Yukon government was willing to go. They wanted to get rid of free entry staking, and they didn't want free entry light as the follow-up. They said that they were concerned that Yukon government was viewing final agreements as like the absolute top of where it could go, as opposed to the starting point of where that minerals legislation should go. And that's a concern because industry recognizes that without First Nation support, there is no success, right? So the Yukon Party and the Liberals are responsible for not having had new minerals legislation prior to the Eagle Mine disaster. And when I talk about the public inquiry, and I'm excited for Selkirk First Nation and the Minto Mine, that's fantastic, but I'll remind everyone that that entire mine shut down on a Friday afternoon and everyone walked away, and by the end of the day, there was no one left on the board. It did not start as a success. It was not a success. I worked at Wolverine Mine. I met Josie O'Brien when I worked at Wolverine Mine. She was an environmental monitor and I was the cook. And I knew that mine was never gonna sell because when I was on that mine site, it was nothing but problems. And at the time, the Yukon Party didn't collect enough environmental, they didn't have the money. And you're still paying for it. Yukon, we are still paying for Wolverine Mine. We're gonna be paying for the Eagle Mine. We have paid $220 million to date. It is not acceptable. So when we talk about an economy of the future, we have to talk about one that actually works for Yukon, where we benefit from the non-renewable resources that are taken away. Do you all feel like you've benefited? Nacho Nagdan, have you benefited? So it can't be the same way. And if we're not committed to the change and we're not really committed to the change, then it's just gonna be the same mistake. So the public inquiry is because the Yukon government was involved in all 3 of those projects. The Yukon government is the continuity in those 3 projects. And that is how come I keep on talking about that public inquiry, because we cannot make the same mistakes.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Well, thank you very much. Look, I'm a believer that we should, in the Yukon, have an economy that is driven by a growing, healthy private sector. And so we want to see that private sector economy growing here in the Yukon and continuing to provide the jobs and opportunities for Yukoners. We know that the best way to grow that private sector is by responsibly developing our natural resources, including our mineral resources. And I think that the opportunity that presents itself is exactly as Cynthia has explained. We have some of the best geological resources out there. Our critical mineral deposits are world-class. We have the opportunity to contribute to the development of the Canadian North in a way that hasn't been done previously. But it does take partnership. It takes partnership between Yukon government, First Nation governments, and the entire community to advance these projects. We know that we need to be doing things in a better way as well. We agree with the goal of adopting new minerals legislation and following up on the work that's been done by the current government through the development of the legislative framework that exists right now between the Yukon government and First Nations governments. We don't know the details of that framework precisely because we've been in opposition, but we know that that's the starting point for the ongoing discussion of how we bring about new minerals legislation. In addition to that, we know that we need to do a better job of inspecting, monitoring, and ensuring compliance with the regulations of existing mines. We have learned a great deal from the Independent Review Board's report that looked into the Eagle Gold disaster, and agree very much with the recommendations made therein, that there's a lot of work that can be done by both industry and regulators to improve the practices, improve our oversight of the mining industry, and ensure that the mining industry is living up to its obligations under existing regulations. So we believe in the mining industry. There's an opportunity for the continued growth of it, and examples like Cynthia gave of the Minto mine and the innovative new ownership model that includes the Selkirk First Nation at the forefront of that mine is just one opportunity that exists out there. Now, beyond the mining industry, there's a whole bunch of other opportunities in the Yukon as well. And since we've been talking about it so much tonight, I'll build on it briefly and say that the energy industry, I think, presents tremendous opportunities as well. Whether it's on the renewable energy side, whether it's First Nations-led energy projects, these are projects that can truly add to and diversify our private sector economy here in the Yukon, and First Nations can be at the forefront of that. Thank you.
Thank you for your response, Curry. We're now going to move to whether you want to ask a question, respond, or expand. So we're going to start with Kate White, followed by Curry Dixon, then Cynthia. And, you know, I just want to say we've heard from all of your opening statements the many, many challenges that Yukoners are facing on all levels in this sector. It not only affects industry, but all of our lives in the Yukon. So with that, I'm going to start with Kate. If you want to ask a question, respond, or expand.
So after the after the Wolverine mine went declared bankruptcy, I sat in a room actually at what is now the Sternwheeler, as business owners were told that they would get cents on the dollar for the money that they were owed, because of a change to a piece of legislation under the Yukon Party called the Miners' Lien Act. So the Miners' Lien Act means that that if you are a business who's provided services to a mine, that if something happens, you actually don't get paid first. There's no guarantee that you'll get paid. And the reason I bring this up is because we saw it under the Yukon Party with Wolverine, but we've seen it again with the Eagle, with Victoria Gold. And so I've asked the question, I asked the question before when it was Curry's government, and I've asked the question when it was the Liberal government. So are you committed to changing the Miners' Lien Act so that businesses can get paid for the work that they've done?
Okay, so Kate has asked the question, so I'll now move to Curry to answer first, followed by Cynthia.
Thank you. I appreciate the question from Kate, and I agree with it. The Miners' Lien Act does need to be updated, so I agree with that.
Cynthia?
If there's an act that can reflect modern day needs of Yukoners, then I'm in.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party. If you would like to ask a question, respond, or expand.
I guess I'll expand then. Where I left off, I was talking about the opportunity that exists around energy projects. And the reason I raised that is because there's such a demand right now for energy development in the territory. And there's such an opportunity that exists. And I think that's something that it sounds like the three of us perhaps agree on, but I think it's worth mentioning that the creation of new energy generation in the territory is needed for the development of our economy and the ongoing function of our society, but it also creates economic opportunities. And in those economic opportunities, I think, are particularly acute with Yukon First Nations. So I won't build on it more than that, other than to say that I think that there's tremendous opportunity, and I look forward to exploring that opportunity with Yukon First Nations if we're successful.
Thank you for your expansion. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party. If you'd like to expand, respond, or ask a question.
Yeah, I would like to expand. I think that we've hit a new economic plateau in the Yukon. I think that we're going to have to work together to have a heavy lift in the future, and that's going to be including and of course with Yukon First Nations, but also Yukon government, stakeholders, all of the above. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to do another round here of another question. We're going to keep the order. So we had Cynthia James, you'll respond first, followed by Kate White, then Curry Dixon. So just an expansion into this category is, what changes will you make, or what changes are needed to restore confidence in the government's ability to promote and steward stable, responsible, and compliant mining, energy, and major infrastructure projects? So what kind of changes are needed to restore that? I will start with Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party. I'll repeat the question. So what changes in regards to this question in the introduction that I read to the question? What changes are needed to restore confidence in the government's ability to promote and steward stable, responsible, and compliant mining, energy, and major infrastructure projects? So this relates to, what is your party's vision for the future from the previous question?
In recognizing that we, out of 26 self-governing nations in Canada, we have 11 of them, and I think that hasn't been fully realized in the Yukon yet. And I think the changes, and in particular to mining, and I'm coming at it from a person of this land, is that again we need to be at the table early days. In the spirit of economic reconciliation, you have to work with proponents and mining companies to make sure that you're aligning in value systems that are implemented, that it could include the TRC, 94 calls to action. What does that look? Where can we implement that within in impact benefits agreements, or looking at the UNDRIP? And I know that we don't implement UNDRIP, but it's still, we're working with jurisdictions that we fall under, and MMIWG, 2S+, and man camps.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP Party.
So I've already talked about minerals legislation, so I'll move on. I think when we talk about major infrastructure projects, and again, we've typically gone with like the lowest bid. We bought the cheapest battery. It's not the best battery. We've gone with lowest bids. There's one apprentice out on the Teslin Bridge project, so that's great for the biggest infrastructure project in Yukon history. I mean, I think it should have been better than that. And I think we need to make sure that when we're asking for these things, that we look what people can bring. Like we talk about value added. Also making sure that when companies do great work, when they hit the marks, they're training, it's leaving a benefit behind the community, then they should be like a preferred bidder. We should recognize when someone is successful. We should recognize when they're doing what we're asking, and making sure that things move smoother. I think there's real opportunity to do things in a better way, and that will benefit communities and the territory.
Thank you for your response. Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Thank you. I'll build on the large infrastructure projects as from what I said before. I think we need to be improving the oversight and accountability of our management of large infrastructure projects, and the Teslin Bridge is a perfect example of that. There needs to be accountability, and there needs to be clear improvements to the way that these projects are overseen. In the case of the Teslin Bridge, we've seen the largest change order in history for the Yukon applied to that bridge, and that was because of an oversight, a mistake made by the Yukon government in relation to the seeking of permits for that bridge. That mistake cost the taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, and that can't be acceptable. So we need to improve the way that we oversee and ensure accountability for large infrastructure projects in the Yukon.
Okay, thank you for your response, Curry. I'll now move to Kate, if you would like to respond, expand, or make a question for anybody's statements.
I'm going to say that I'll wait for the next question so we can see what else is coming.
Curry? Okay. Cynthia? Okay, we'll move right along to the next question. So the next question category is Northern Vision and Sovereignty. And then we're going to get into questions from the floor. And the order is Kate White, Curry Dixon, Cynthia James. As the Arctic changes, so does Yukon's place in Canada and the world. Global trade routes and emerging technologies are shaping the North. There is growing interest in Canada's North from security, critical minerals, and infrastructure. These developments create major opportunities, but also major responsibilities for the Yukon and for Yukon First Nations, who hold the rights, knowledge, and leadership needed to guide sustainable growth. The question now is whether Yukon will lead in this northern future or be left reacting to decisions made elsewhere. Your question is, what is your party's vision for Yukon's role in Arctic sovereignty, and how will you ensure Yukon First Nations are leaders in shaping that future? Okay, so I'll start with Kate White, Yukon NDP.
So when we talk about Arctic sovereignty, the first thing I would say is when we have communities where there's such an overcrowding of houses or a lack of houses or real poverty or real lack of opportunity or lack of hope, how can we talk about sovereignty without addressing that first? There is a need to make sure that communities can participate no matter where they are in the territory. But in order for that participation, there needs to be a change. We need to make sure folks have access to the housing that they need, that they have access to the healthcare that they need, that they're able to meet their basic needs, and in some cases that's not happening. And so when I think about the Arctic sovereignty question as a whole, I mean, we could go one way or we can go the opposite way, and ultimately I think you're going to end up in the same spot. But I think I want to make sure that Yukon people can participate in whatever that future looks like, and not just be along for the ride, but full participants. I want to make sure that they have access to the education opportunities, whether it's trades or, whether they want to be mining engineers. I want to make sure people have access to the food they need when they go to school so you can get through grade 4, so you can see that future that you want. I want to make sure people have the opportunity to trade for the trades, because when I worked at Yukon Zinc or when I worked at the Wolverine mine, the folks from communities weren't even given the opportunity to learn how to operate equipment. They shoveled snow and they burned garbage, which was not opportunity, which is not what we're talking about. And so when I think about like sovereignty, and I think about that opportunity, and I think about that investment that's coming, I want to make sure that every Yukoner has an opportunity to play the role they want. I don't want people to be left behind. I don't want a workforce to be shipped in and then shipped out. I want to make sure that we have that ability. I want to make sure that we are part of that equation. And so like we need to bolster communities. We need to support communities. We need to make sure that people can be successful in the way that they can be successful. And so for me, the first thing is making sure that people have access to what they need. Healthcare, housing, education, like really core things.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Thank you. So I think that the current federal government has made it clear that they want to make considerable investments in a few different areas that could significantly benefit the Yukon. The three that come to mind for me are the development of critical minerals, the investment in military and the infrastructure to support military development in the north, and what they call nation-building projects. So I think all three of those that are being advanced by the federal government present some considerable opportunities for us to consider. But as we know, Yukon has had a long history of outside governments making decisions about our infrastructure that did not engage locals, incorporate traditional knowledge, or reflect priorities of the individuals living here. Every Yukon community has an infrastructure gap, and there's an opportunity through tapping into the agenda of the current federal government to find ways to secure funding for major investments. Our government will commit to working with Yukon First Nations and communities to identify priorities and to collectively advocate with Ottawa for investments that support community well-being, northern security, climate change, and First Nations economic development objectives. So I think that there's an opportunity here to tap into the current agenda, but we have to do it in the right way, and we have to do it in a way that ensures that Yukon voices are at the table.
Thank you for your response. Now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
Yeah, growing up in a Yukon First Nation community, there's the resources, and my riding is rural. The resources that are totally vital for our community is, the RCMP, the nurses, the just the volunteer firefighters, the volunteer ambulance folks. And without those, or if there's any impact in any way, it reverberates through the community, and it's felt. The supply and demand, building homes, all of those different things mean something different in a community. And so I think that being cognizant of that, and I find that it's very Whitehorse centered, a lot of our focus, and coming from a rural community and then coming into Whitehorse, I spent a week in Teslin last week, and then I came back into Whitehorse, and I was like, there's a lot of people and very limited infrastructure to fit all of us downtown. And I wanted to get back to Teslin as fast as I could to keep campaigning because it was so quiet and beautiful. So communities, like any resources or support that our rural communities get and have in the future, I think that's is a priority for sure for me working forward, if I'm blessed to. Northern vision and sovereignty. The North is attracting more attention than ever. Arctic security and Canadian sovereignty are being spoken of a great deal at the federal level. It is clear that the Yukon is going to play a key role in Canada's future, and we need to make sure we are at the table making decisions. We've heard loud and clear from the federal government about increased defense and security spending and how a significant portion of this funding is expected in the North. All of these changes will have big impacts, and we want to make sure they benefit Yukoners and Yukon First Nations alike. Investment by Department of Defense in Arctic security spending, and recognizing that Yukon First Nations must be included in conversations and decision-making around national defense that impact their territories, and we are committed to be at the table with the federal government alongside Yukon First Nations and as moving this along. And I just want to be cognizant as well, like as an inland Tlingit person, borders don't apply to me. And being from an inland coming in from Alaska, my brothers and sisters in Alaska, are impacted by this relationship. And I look at it, our economy that we had was built on trading with our trading partners. And so, that still applies when we go across the border, and that type of relationship that we do have with our brothers and sisters and relatives across the border. So I just wanted to make that point as well. Sheesh.
Thank you for your response. I'll now move to Curry if he would like to ask a question for clarification, respond, or expand.
The only thing I would expand on is I just wanted to note that there's an excellent report that was done by the Assembly of First Nations Yukon region that was released in August that provided a number of recommendations for how some of this work can be done. And so I just wanted to recognize that report and indicate that the recommendations made therein, and they're broad, there's a number of them, but they relate directly to this and how there can be a better how we can better ensure that Yukon First Nations play a central role in these types of defense-related investments in the Yukon.
Thank you for that. I'll now move to Cynthia for if you'd like to ask a question, respond, or expand. Okay, she's good. So I'll now move to Kate.
It's really important when we look at the funding that can be coming to the Yukon that it does benefit Yukoners and the Yukon. Again, Wolverine Mine, when we were in care and maintenance, there was 12 Yukoners and let's say 30 outsiders. And when it was going up into full production, there was 24 Yukoners and 300 outsiders, all flying in, all flying out. Income tax being paid out of territory, working out of territory, all those things. And so when we look at the money that could be coming from the federal government to advance these projects, we need to make sure that Yukon isn't left behind, that we are ready and able to go for the construction projects, that communities are being engaged and making decisions about what this looks like. And so I just don't want to see what I've seen in the past, which is the benefit to folks outside. I think it should stay here.
Okay, thank you for your responses. I'll now move on to our next question. And this one, you'll have up to 2 minutes to respond to it. And this one comes from online. In the order, Cynthia, Curry, then Kate. And the question is, Alpine, in regards to Alpine Bakery has been closed for 2 years, and 2 other businesses suffered from the surrounding criminality in the neighborhood. What will you do to rectify this situation and to deal with the crime in the downtown area and address safety issues as well? So what will you do about the issues that are facing our downtown core? We'll start with Cynthia.
Again, I'm a rural candidate, so I'm going to speak from that perspective. Community safety is definitely on the minds of Southern Lake Yukon. In these communities, we're impacted by different levels of struggles with the opioid crisis, and that really impacts nations. It definitely personally impacts me as well in my community and in Southern Lakes communities. I think that this is another definite conversation that will have to have key stakeholders, Yukon First Nations, leadership, and I think that that is going to be also another heavy lift. That's going to be a collective that we all need to work together to solve. As far as the crime downtown, again, I don't really spend a lot of time downtown because of the busyness of it all. And yeah, that's my response. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I'll now move to Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to respond to the question directly. The Whitehorse Emergency Shelter and the operation of the emergency shelter has become a real problem. When the government made the decision back in 2019 to take over the shelter, they changed the operating model of the shelter, and ever since then we've seen a decline in the quality of services in that area. As well, we've seen a concentration of other services in that area that have created a hub of criminal activity and bad behavior, and some real problems for the neighborhood as a whole. It's negatively impacting the neighbors, it's negatively impacting the businesses in the surrounding area, and it's hurting those who need the services the most. We continue to hear from Yukoners who want to seek services in that area, but don't feel safe doing so with the current environment in that area. So we need to do a number of things to change that. We need to change the operating model of the Whitehorse Emergency Shelter. We need to begin to decentralize some of the social services that are being delivered in that direct area. That's been the advice of report after report over the last few years, which have been calling for the Yukon government to take these actions. And so we'll pursue that. That needs to be paired, though, with important investments in ensuring that there's treatment options for people who have substance abuse issues. Since the government declared a substance use emergency a number of years ago, we haven't seen a commensurate response in terms of action. We haven't seen the government invest in new treatment options. We haven't seen a focus on treatment, enforcement, or prevention, and all of those things need attention. As well, we think that the RCMP need more resources, and need more resources not just here in Whitehorse, but around the Yukon as well. I'm out of time, but those are some concrete actions that our government would take.
Thank you. I'll now move to Kate White, Yukon NDP, for your response.
Thank you. So there are lots of times where we can just throw up our hands and say it's too hard, and there's, let's just give up. I look at, for example, the difference on how the shelter is managed and how the supervised consumption site by Blood Ties is managed. And the reason I highlight that is because it's sometimes it's the same clientele, but there's a different expectation of behavior. I fundamentally believe we can ask people to rise to meet us. We can say, if you're having a hard time, I need you to walk around the building and then you can come back. It's actually one of the Blood Ties rules. Walk around the building, walk around the block, and come back. And then I look across the street from the shelter and I see that Safe at Home has taken over that space, and it's entirely different than it was before, because it's called supportive housing, which is making sure that people have access to the supports that they need, just to live a better life. And I've had lots of conversations with the RCMP, and they tell me it's not a justice issue, it's a health issue. And then I have conversations with the Gunta First Nation, and they talk about the success of the Community Safety Officer program, because it's about diffusing situations. Or to their leadership, where they're talking about making sure that lighting is in a way that reflecting safety. I mean, I think the part that's really uncomfortable is there's one of us at the table that was at the cabinet table that made the decision to build the emergency shelter in the space that it was. And it took up the entire lot, and there was no outdoor space designed, and it was just handed over to the Salvation Army, who at the time said they didn't have the skills to run it. And so I guess the question I ask is, why did the Yukon Party build the emergency shelter in that spot? And why did they not go out to community to consult about its design or its space or what its end goal would look like?
Okay, thank you for your response to that question. We're now going to, I want to let the audience know that all questions will be shared with the candidates for written follow-up, which will be posted on YFNCC.ca. So we do have a lot of questions that we did not manage to get to. So with that, I'm going to move to closing remarks. And the order is Curry Dixon, Yukon Party Leader, Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party, and Kate White, Yukon NDP. So you have up to 2 minutes. Curry.
Okay, well, I'll just start by thanking the Yukon First Nations Chamber of Commerce for hosting this discussion. I really appreciate, Rose, your moderation of the debate tonight has been excellent and much appreciated. Blair, thank you so much for your leadership in bringing this together and making this happen in an innovative format and a bit different than what we've seen previously. So we appreciate that. I also just want to reflect on the growth of the First Nations Chamber of Commerce over the last 11 years since it was created. It's come a long way, and so has the Yukon economy. And the participation that we see from Yukon First Nations businesses, development corporations, and citizens has reshaped the Yukon economy in ways that have been profoundly positive. But we know that there's more to come. We know that there's more opportunity ahead, and we want to be a part of creating that next generation of economy that allows for such greater participation for Yukon First Nations, greater participation for Yukon First Nations businesses, and reflects the true partnership that's encapsulated in Chapter 22. So thank you.
Thank you for your closing remarks. I'll now move to Cynthia James, Yukon Liberal Party.
Gunta for this time and this space, and thank you to the Yukon First Nation Chamber of Commerce for hosting this important discussion tonight. It's been a privilege to share this space with Kate White and Curry Dixon. Thank you both for the respectful discussion and for the work you each do to represent Yukoners. Tonight's conversation has been about more than just policies. It's about how we move forward. And I believe that starts with respect, which we've experienced this evening. Respect for each other as leaders, respect for Yukon First Nations as governments and partners, and respect for the people in the communities who trust us to represent them. Because if we truly want to make progress, if we want to see meaningful change and reconciliation, we have to lead with that respect. It's how we build trust, how we strengthen partnerships, and how we create a Yukon where every community, every nation, and every Yukoner can thrive. I'm proud to be a part of a team that believes deeply in that vision and reconciliation through action, partnership through listening, and progress through collaboration. Gunta to the organizers, Shonithan, to everyone who joined us tonight, and to all those working every day to make the Yukon stronger.
Thank you for your closing remarks, Cynthia. Kate White, Yukon NDP Party.
Thanks. Thanks to my colleagues here at the table, and thanks for definitely the different system than we've had before for the conversation. When I sit here, I think about the hundreds of people I've had the privilege of talking to and hearing their stories. And those stories impact, the direction or the way, I face things. And so this election for me is about better healthcare, and it's about lower costs, and this conversation tonight is all about that. We talk about Chapter 22 and the ability, right, for that economic sovereignty, that economic freedom. And then we just have to look to the leadership, for example, of the development corporations, whether we're talking housing or energy, whether we're talking about First Nation businesses that have found their niche, again, in earth moving or other things. And so when we talk about a future that works for everyone, it's a future where we work together. Whereas government, we make a call for power, and First Nation development corporations are able to build projects that have a lasting impact on their communities. Or it's about trades training in rural Yukon in a way that makes sense for those communities. It's about making sure that folks have that opportunity to participate in that workforce so that they can live the good life that they want. It's about making sure that people have access, whether we're talking about kids in school with a school nutrition program, and making sure that every kid in every school has access to the food they need to learn. Whether we talk about lowering the cost by putting a stop on the power increases, but understanding that also comes with the additional challenges and how Yukon government responds. And so it was a privilege to sit here and to be able to talk more about how I and the Yukon NDP and our team sees the future. I just want you to know that you can count on me. You can count on the team and know that we'll show up to have these conversations when we're invited. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for your closing statements. I'll now like to call upon the President, Blair Hogan, for a closing statement.
Gunta, thank you so much, and what a tremendous last couple of days. We've had CYFN's event last night with 139 Zoom participants, 50 people in the room, and broadcast on Shone FM. Tonight we had 100 online, 25 in the room, and broadcast on Shone FM. So we are extraordinarily happy and proud to be part of getting the party's campaigns out and the platforms and getting people engaged with the potential leadership. And we've had tremendous uptake in questions and it's just so amazing to be part of that. So thank you, candidates. 6 hours in the last 2 days of questions. That certainly can't be easy. I couldn't imagine. And we just want to say as well as thank you everybody to attend and to be so attentive and engaged. Like we saw zero drop off of the last 2 nights, which I'm pretty sure we broke some Yukon records with the attendance that we had here. So extraordinarily proud of that. And I just want to thank Richard Eden. I want to thank James Pugsley. I want to thank the team Gunta with Jesse and Stephanie and Victoria and Robert and Glenn and CYFN, our partner in the last 2 days. We all came together to pull this off, and we had these dates planned for the last couple months, and we kind of figured when the writ would be dropped, and we really took a gamble, and so glad that you guys were able to make it and participate, and couldn't be happier with how it all came together. So thank you so much. Gunta Chish once again, and I'll ask Rose to come up and close with a prayer. Thank you.
So again, I want to thank the candidates for your participation, and to our audience for joining us here and online. And please remember to make your voice heard in the upcoming territorial election. Visit electionsyukon.ca for full voting details. As we stated yesterday, your vote does matter. So with that, I want to also give a thanks to working with Gunta Business. They're First Nation, 100% First Nation owned and operated business. And I've worked with them before, and it is such a pleasure to work with a good team. And of course, the people at the First Nations Chamber of Commerce, a good team and a good group of people. Next debate will be really prepared, one-on-one, one at a time. Okay, so with that, I want to end this meeting in a good way, and I do pray for people's safe journeys home tonight, and I pray for your families at home. So Konish Chish, Datayata Nanje, Aganzanu Sothan, Dakanata J, Sothan Datsanata Nanje, Dadu Dakunata, Klahu J. Thank you.